Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I'm your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. Thank you for joining me today. So today we are continuing with our commercial pilot ACS review. Today we're going to tackle the topic of airworthiness. Now, here's the thing, everybody. As most of you know, the topics here in the commercial ACS are all the same ones that are in the private pilot ACS. Hopefully you have all already listened to my private ACS breakdown, and if you haven't, you can find them back in the episode history. There are 9 episodes in the private pilot ACS breakdown. Now, these are not on YouTube. I recorded these back before I was doing video podcasts, so they are only going to be on your podcast providers such as Spotify or Apple Podcast or most other podcast providers. So go find the On Centerline podcast on whatever your favorite podcast provider is. You can find all 9 episodes of the private pilot ACS breakdown, which covers most of everything that we would be talking about here in the commercial pilot ACS. So when doing this commercial pilot ACS and trying to break it down, I'm trying to think of how I can differentiate the standards for the private level of knowledge and skills as compared to the commercial level. However, I think I was so detailed in the private breakdown that I'm not always sure what else to add to it for the commercial. So with that said, this is going to be the last regular episode of the commercial ACS breakdown that we're going to do. But don't worry, if you're dying for more commercial check ride prep, I simply need you to tell me exactly what it is you'd like me to discuss, and I'll do the best I can to address each of your requests in future episodes. So leave your comments below, either on the video or leave a comment on the episode on Spotify or your favorite podcast provider. Let me know what topics you'd like me to touch on, and I will be more than happy to do the best I can to do so. All right, well, with that, let's get into some airworthiness. Now, just like we kind of did with the weather episode in our instrument pilot ACS breakdown, I'm not going to necessarily go down line item by line item like we originally did in the private pilot ACS. And today with airworthiness, the same things largely apply. Okay, so we're going to approach this a little differently, trying to dissect airworthiness a little bit more without necessarily going line item by line item. Okay, so the first question I thought would be worth answering is, what is airworthiness? What does it mean to be airworthy? What's the definition of the words? Now, there are a lot of sources we can look to in order to get a sense of what it means to be airworthy, and it's probably a little bit more elaborate than what most of you originally considered it to be. So we're going to pull up a letter of interpretation here from 2008. Let me pull it up here. This is the letter of interpretation from March 26, 2008 to Mr. Christopher Witkowski, all right? And there's just really one, there's a couple things. First of all, they quote section 91.7 Bravo. And this states that the pilot of a civil aircraft is responsible for determining whether that aircraft is in condition for safe flight. It's a very important point. We're going to be coming back to that here in a bit. It says the pilot in command shall discontinue the flight when unairworthy mechanical, electrical, or structural conditions occur. Okay, so this particular excerpt just talks about the pilot's responsibility, the PIC's responsibility in determining the airworthiness of an aircraft. It goes on to quote a section from 3.5. This is 3.5 alpha. It states that airworthy means the aircraft conforms to its type design and is in condition for safe operation. Okay? Now, there's a couple different ways to say type design is kind of an older term used. Type certificate is what you're probably more used to hearing these days and what we're going to kind of be using going forward. But The next paragraph, not the next one, but the next one we're going to read, this talks about exactly what's required in order for an aircraft to be airworthy. I'm going to go ahead and just read it verbatim from the LOI here. It says, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, long ago adopted a standard for airworthiness that was based on the statutory requirement for the issuance by the FAA of an airworthiness certificate for an aircraft. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. It says the term airworthiness is best defined by reference to Section 603C of the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. And it says it imposes a two-pronged definition. It says here, in order to be airworthy, an aircraft must, 1, conform to its type certificate if and as that certificate has been modified by supplemental type certificates and by airworthiness directives, and 2, must be in condition for safe operation. Okay, they say this is currently found in kind of the newer version of Part 49, which provides that the administrator shall issue an airworthiness certificate when the administrator, which, by the way, the administrator is the FAA, okay, the FAA finds that the aircraft conforms to its type certificate and, after inspection, is in condition for safe operation. All right? So that's the definition that can be found in Part 49 and kind of gives us a better understanding of what it means, or at least what the FAA thinks it means for an aircraft to be airworthy and what's required for it to be issued an airworthiness certificate. But let's go back and just do a quick recap of all the things we discussed back in the private pilot ACS breakdown and all the things that we as the pilots are generally looking for when it comes to determining the airworthiness of an aircraft. So, of course, we need to make sure that aircraft has certain documents that need to be on board. It needs to have had certain inspections done, okay? And for this, we can use our handy-dandy acronyms, our AERO acronym for documents. Okay, again, this is just a recap. Go back and listen to the old episodes, folks, if you need more information. But AERO, Airworthiness Certificate, registration. The second R, should you choose to use it, would be your radio operator certificate. We generally omit that because it's only needed if you're going outside the continental U.S. O, we're going to come back to this. O is operating limitations. It is not owner's manual or POH, as so many people think it is. It is operating limitations. Now, yes, the owner's manual may contain some of those operating limitations, but that is far from the all-encompassing item that we need to have on board the aircraft. And then finally, W, our weight and balance. Okay, those are our documents that we need. Let's talk about our inspections. We use the acronym AVIATES, okay? AVIATES. A is for annual. Of course, annual needs to be done every 12 calendar months. V, VOR. The VOR is only required if you're flying under IFR, but it needs to be inspected every 30 days, and that's typically something that just gets done by the pilot. I, the I is actually a 1. It stands for 100 hour. The 100 hour inspection, of course, is only required if you are operating for hire, which coming into a commercial check ride, you can expect is probably going to be brought up by your DPE, by your examiner, because now you are going to be flying for hire. You really need to have a good understanding of if and when a 100 hour is completed and what limitations are kind of or allowances can be made with that 100 hour. Okay, how far past the 100 hour can an aircraft be flown? All right. And again, just to recap, you can go up to 10 hours past the 100 hour only to get that aircraft to a place where that 100 hour can be completed. Okay. So you can't, like, if it's already over 100 hour and you're at your home base where the 100 hour would usually be done, you can't leave and come back just because you're staying within the 10 hours. You also can't really, if you were like at 99.5 hours and you wanted to go on a 2-hour trip, knowing that you'd be back within the 10 hours, that would be irresponsible at best. to say that, oh, it's 99.5 hours, I'm going to go, and then, oops, I'm 2 hours away, I need to come back, but I can because I'm still within the 10 hours. Okay, so we need to be responsible in how we utilize these allowances. But remember that if you overfly that 100-hour by any amount of time, it does not change the time in which the next 100-hour needs to be conducted. In other words, if the 100-hour is due at 200 hours, okay, 200 on the tack, and it doesn't get done until 203, that doesn't mean that the next 100-hour is now due at 303. It means the next 100-hour is still due at 300, okay? So it doesn't change the time of the next 100-hour. All right, moving on. A. Okay, our next A. A lot of people call this altimeter. Guys, it's not. It's not the altimeter. Okay, we're going to come back to that in a second. A is airworthiness directives. Yes, you must have all airworthiness directives either completed and or complied with. Okay. T, transponder, needs to be inspected every 24 calendar months. And then E is our ELT. ELT needs to be done every 12 months. Typically, this is done with the annual. Now, understand that the requirements for changing the battery of an ELT has nothing to do with this particular inspection. This inspection is the one required by 91207, okay? And has nothing to do with the batteries per se, short of the fact that most of the time the inspection of the batteries does occur during this inspection, okay? But this is a regulatory inspection per 91207 that needs to be conducted on the ELT every 12 calendar months, and it must be endorsed or properly logged in the maintenance records as such, okay? And then finally, S. So here's where the confusion happens. People always say altimeter for that second A, skipping airworthiness directives altogether. Then they come to S and say static system. Well, guys, guess what? Your altimeter and static system are the same thing. If anybody ever tells you, hey, we need an altimeter inspection and we need a static system inspection, I challenge you to challenge them to say, okay, show me when the last static system inspection was, and now show me where the last altimeter inspection was. Okay, they're not two separate things. They're the same thing. So S, static system, which, yes, encompasses your altimeter, needs to be done every 24 calendar months. Typically, that gets done at the same time as your transponder, okay? So, aviates, annual, VOR, 100-hour, airworthiness directives, transponder, ELT, and static system. Okay, those are our inspections that need to be done in order to maintain the aircraft in an airworthy condition. And finally, we have required equipment depending on what type of flight you're doing. 91205 spells out the requirements for our daytime VFR, our nighttime VFR, and IFR required equipment. Okay, and we use our acronym A, tomato flames. For our daytime VFR, we add on the acronym FLAPS for our nighttime VFR, and we add on the acronym grab card for our IFR required equipment. All right, so that's all the required equipment as required by the regulation of 91205, but we know there are more sources or documents that may require you to have certain types of equipment, such as your KOEL, your kinds of operating equipment list or kinds of operation equipment list. These are equipment lists that are generally in your POH. If you have a newer aircraft, if you have an older aircraft, you might not have a KOEL, but this is going to basically tell you a certain type of operation. For instance, daytime, nighttime, instrument, flight and icing conditions, different things like that. And it will tell you what equipment is required for those operations. All right, we have that. We also, of course, have MELs. Now, MELs are not generally used in the GA world, let alone the flight training world. Our training aircraft don't generally have MELs. Now, I talked about this in the private pilot ACS breakdown, so you can go back for a full review, but Let's just take a look at an MEL. And the first thing we need to understand is that the FAA creates for a given aircraft a master minimum equipment list, an MEL. Okay, a master minimum equipment list. And these MELs, these minimum equipment lists, are lists that talk about what pieces of equipment are able to be inoperative and still allow for flight under certain conditions at the very least. So we're going to pull up the master minimum equipment list here for the King Air 300 series of aircraft. Now, when it comes to minimum equipment lists, you have to understand that a certain manufacturer or certain operators, they could have their own minimum equipment list, but it cannot be any less restrictive than the master minimum equipment list. Okay, a certain operator might have a fleet of King Airs and decide, hey, we're going to make our own minimum equipment list to say that our pilots, you can fly without this, or you can fly without that, or you can't fly without this, whatever it may be. But that document has to be based on and not any less restrictive than the master minimum equipment list as set forth by the FAA. So let's just take a look here for some examples. You're going to see some different lines and different kind of codes when you look at these minimum equipment lists. First, there is a table key that tells you what each row or each column is showing. It says row 1 or column 1 is repair category. We're going to come back to that here in a second. Column 2 is number installed. Okay, how many of that given item are installed? Number 3 is number required for dispatch. And number 4 is remarks or exceptions. So let's take a look. Repair category, guys. There are 4 repair categories, A, B, C, and D. All right, and for information on that, we can look up AC 120 MEL. All right, how convenient is that? 120 MEL. And in AC 120 MEL, we can see it will define those interval categories for you, and we can read them here. Okay, repair categories. I'm just going to read the initial paragraph here. It says, each item listed in an MEL should include a repair category designator as depicted in the master MEL. Repair categories represent the maximum time interval during which an item may be inoperative. When an item becomes inoperative and the operator defers repair, the aircraft may not be operated beyond the specified period until repairs are made. All right, so going on here, we're just going to start with repair category A. It says this category item must be repaired within the interval specified in the remarks or exceptions column. Okay, that's column 4. Talks about remarks and exceptions, and it will specify the time period in which that item needs to be addressed. Okay, repair category B. This category item must be repaired within 3 consecutive calendar days, 72 hours, excluding the day of discovery. For example, if it were recorded at 10 a.m. on January 26th, the 3-day interval would begin on the 27th and end at 11:59 and 59 seconds on January 29th, okay? Repair category C. It says this category item must be repaired within 10 consecutive calendar days, excluding the day of discovery, okay? And then repair category D, this is the least kind of restrictive or the most flexible one. Repair category D, this category item must be repaired within 120 consecutive calendar days, excluding the day of discovery, okay? So A is potentially the most kind of restrictive. A could potentially say, hey, this item must be repaired immediately and cannot be flown until it is. But B would be the next most kind of restrictive or the highest priority of 3 days, followed by C, which is 10 days, and D, which is 120 days. Okay, moving on here to the next column, which talks about the number installed. This is how many are on the given aircraft. And we're just going to look at a certain example. All right, so on the King Air 300 series, if we're looking under electrical power, we can see that for AC inverters, it says this is for the B300 and B300C, excluding the ProLine 21 and ProLine Fusion versions. Okay, that's the avionics that would be incorporated. But AC inverters, it says that there are 2 on the aircraft. And then our next line shows how many are required, and it says that there's only 1 required. So potentially, if one of our AC inverters was inoperative, we could still fly as long as we can meet the criteria in column 4, which is the remarks or exceptions. And here we see that for the remarks, it states that one of the AC inverters may be inoperative provided the aircraft is operated in VMC only, the aircraft is not operated at night, and the AC bus transfer is operative. Okay? So that's the conditions that that we need to meet if we are going to operate without this second AC inverter. So only VMC conditions, no IFR. Doesn't say you can't fly on an IFR flight plan. It just says you can't be an IMC. Okay, so you can still file IFR flight plan. You can still go obviously up to the flight levels where those types of aircraft generally like to be, but you can't be in IMC. You have to remain in VMC, and you can't do it at night. So that's pretty restrictive. And I mean, for an aircraft like that, it can certainly be restrictive and maybe hard to comply with. So here's the question. If that was too hard for you to comply with as the pilot, where would that leave you? Is that aircraft still airworthy? I was going to come back to this later, but might as well just talk about it now. You know, the thing that gets overlooked by so many pilots, and despite everything we're talking about here, despite required documents, despite required equipment, despite required inspections, whether or not an aircraft is airworthy really comes down to one final thing, and that's whether you as the pilot consider it to be airworthy. As we stated earlier, reading in that regulation, part 91.7, it says, the pilot in command of a civil aircraft is responsible for determining whether that aircraft is in condition for safe flight. It doesn't say anything about the pilot determining that it's in safe condition only because it has its required inspections and equipment and documents. It just says determine that the aircraft is in safe condition for flight. So it really doesn't matter if on paper an aircraft is completely airworthy. If you as the pilot in command do not deem that aircraft airworthy, it's not airworthy and you don't go. So this could be the case in scenarios such as we're talking about here with the King Air. I mean, if you didn't think that you could make a flight and stay out of the clouds, or that you wouldn't make it to your destination before nighttime, then obviously you would be making the determination that that aircraft is not airworthy and that you're not making that flight. Bring it back to the GA world or your training environment a little bit more, perhaps. You know, we talk about 91.205 and landing lights. We know that landing lights are only required at night if you are operating for hire. But does that mean that if you show up for a day or night flight for that matter, it doesn't really make a difference, but if you show up for any flight and you're not operating for hire, if your landing light is out, does that mean that you have to go? Do your personal minimums allow for, let's just say, nighttime flight without a landing light, even though it's not legally required for that particular flight? When was the last time you practiced a no landing light landing? What airports are you going to? Are you going to well-lit, large airports, ones that you are familiar with and comfortable at? Or are you going to little tiny, hole-in-the-wall, unlit or very minimally lit, small runways, Maybe it's a new airport you've never been to. All of these things need to be considered before you make the decision to take that airplane flying at night without a landing light. Okay? So, no matter what any of these regulations say, no matter what documents or inspections or required equipment a certain aircraft has, remember that ultimately it's up to you as the pilot in command to do a thorough pre-flight check and make the determination for yourself and ultimately for your passengers as to the airworthiness of that aircraft. Okay? All right, let's keep going here, guys. We're going to look at that scenario a little bit more. The scenario of, hey, what if my landing light is out? Or even, what if this AC inverter in this Beechcraft King Air is out? What do we have to do when it comes to inoperative equipment? Now, we should know that there are three primary things that need to be done with any piece of inoperative equipment. Number one, it needs to be either deactivated or removed from the plane. If it's not removed from the plane, if it's just deactivated, it needs to be placarded as inoperative. And then there needs to be the appropriate entries made in the maintenance logbooks. Okay? Now, I talk about this in detail in the private pilot airworthiness episode, so go back and listen to that. But what I wanted to bring up was another AC that I came across. This is AC, let's see here. Which one is this? This is AC 9167. Okay, the subject is minimum equipment requirements for general aviation operations. Okay, so this is for general aviation. Okay, this would not apply necessarily if you were under Part 125, 135, 121, anything like that. But this is for Part 91. And if we scroll down, this talks about a lot of things with required equipment. But if we scroll down a little bit, it's going to also talk about what to do when that piece of equipment is inoperative. So whenever I'm doing either mock check rides or just quizzing my own students, one of the questions I ask them when it comes to inoperative equipment, ask them, hey, what do we need to do with this piece of equipment? If you're going to make the decision to go fly with this piece of equipment inoperative, what needs to happen? And they say, oh, well, we need to deactivate it. I need to placard it. And, they may or may not talk about the maintenance logbooks. But my next question would typically be, okay, well, first of all, how are you going to deactivate it? So let's talk about the landing light. If your landing light's inoperative, how are you going to deactivate it? Well, for any piece of electrical equipment, typically it's going to have a circuit breaker, and we could pull that circuit breaker, and that could work. But then my question to them is, okay, well, can you, as the pilot, deactivate it? Can you, as the pilot, placard it inoperative? Who is able to do that? And the short answer is it depends. But there was a good paragraph here in this AC that I wanted to read from. And it says this. It says, a certificated, which, by the way, is a student pilot certificated? No, they're not. Okay, so a certificated pilot needs to be at least a private pilot for the purposes of what we're talking about here. A certificated pilot can accomplish deactivation involving routine pilot tasks, such as turning off a system. However, for a pilot to deactivate an item or system, that task must come under the definition of preventative maintenance in Part 43, Subpart A. So in other words, if it's not something that you would be able to do under preventative maintenance in Part 43, you are not able to do it as far as deactivating this piece of equipment. Okay? So when it comes to a landing light being out, and I'm just thinking out loud here because I don't know, is that something that we as the pilot could deactivate? Could we just pull the circuit breaker and deactivate that landing light? Well, we know that in Part 43, we are able to change light bulbs, but that's not exactly what we're doing here. So I don't know. I mean, this is if any of you have any thoughts or know the answer to this, would pulling the circuit breaker on a landing light be something that would fall under that preventative maintenance guidance and therefore be something that a certificated pilot could do? Now it goes on to say that if the deactivation procedures do not fall under preventative maintenance, a properly certificated maintenance person must accomplish the deactivation. The maintenance person must record the deactivation in accordance with FAR 43.9 and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so basically you have to have an A&P or an IA, at the very least, oversee and approve the deactivation. Can you be the one to physically pull the circuit breaker out? Yes, that's fine. But ultimately, you have to have a licensed mechanic be the one to oversee it and sign it off as for return to service. Now, the next paragraph goes on to say, placarding can be as simple as writing the word inoperative on a piece of masking tape and attaching it to the inoperative equipment or to its cockpit control. Placarding is essential since it reminds the pilot that the equipment is inoperative. It also ensures that future flight crews and maintenance personnel are aware of the discrepancy. Okay, so that's good to know. I mean, according to this AC at least, is that you could be as simple as writing the word inoperative on a piece of masking tape. But it's important to understand that unless an item falls under Part 43 of preventative maintenance, the definition of preventative maintenance, pilot conducted preventative maintenance, you as the pilot cannot be the one to simply deactivate and placard something inoperative. You have to have a licensed mechanic, an A&P or IA do that for you, okay? All right, guys, so this is kind of funny. The very next paragraph that I had yet to actually scroll down and read states this. It has a example of a preventative maintenance entry, which you as the pilot would need to make sure goes into the aircraft logbooks. But it gives this exact example for a landing light inoperative. Now, again, this AC came out in June of 1991, long before LEDs. Okay, and we have a lot of LEDs on planes these days. Most lights are LED. We can't simply change the light bulb, especially on a landing light, usually these days. But per this example, by the way, it says the placard needs to be a minimum of 1/8 inch high letters, okay? But per this example, the preventative maintenance entry would read something like this. It would say date, total time, hours, landing light bulb removed in accordance with the manufacturer maintenance manual, chapter blank, page blank, okay? Landing light switch placarded inoperative. So as we kind of just discussed a minute ago, Part 43 does state that we can change light bulbs. So if it is something as simple as you removing a light bulb from a landing light or a position light or anything else, a non-essential and non-required piece of equipment, and then placarding the switch as inoperative, that's perfectly fine. And you would need to make the note in the maintenance manual or maintenance logs, okay? But these days with the LED lights, I mean, again, we can't just take the light bulb out. And I don't know where pulling a circuit breaker falls into the scheme of things. All right, I would imagine, I mean, if it was my guess, I would say that probably pulling the circuit breaker on the landing light would be adequate, and you'd want to collar it, right? You don't just pull it because somebody could think it just popped and then they push it right back in. So ideally, we would pull it, we would collar it so it can't be pushed back in, and then placard it. And that may very well fall under preventative maintenance, but don't take my word for it. Let's find out together. If any of you happen to know or find out, put it down in the comments, okay? All right, guys, so in summary, when it comes to airworthiness, it's a very complex topic. We have to make sure we have required documents. We have to make sure we have required inspections and required equipment for the kinds of operations we're doing, or at least for the minimum equipment that we need based on the MEL. Okay, lots of things to consider. And last but certainly not least, making sure that whatever the condition of that plane, it is meeting your minimum and your requirements for airworthiness. You are the final authority as to whether a given aircraft that you are going to be piloting meets airworthiness standards or not. Okay? Well, that will do it for today, folks. If this has been helpful for you, please share it with anyone else you think would find it helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're here on YouTube, and hit that follow button if you're out there in podcast land. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.